Thank you for having me, Laura. I'm just gonna say she's a traitor. She was born in America, she raised in America, lives in America, and choose to compete against her own country for literally the worst human rights, abuser on the planet, China. She built her fame in a free country and then choose to represent an authoritarian regime, which, while chasing endorsement deals.
NBA players are shutting down a woke figure skater who chose China over America. And there are now rumors she could be banned for life from ever setting foot on a U.S. competitive stage again. Enes Kanter went on record and called Eileen Gu a traitor. His word, not mine. Born in America, raised in America, built her entire brand on American platforms, stacked endorsement deals using U.S. audiences, then laced up her skates for a regime he says is operating concentration camps right now. Come on, when an American-born athlete waves a rival flag while her own country watches, every parent with kids in youth sports needs to pay attention. But what we uncovered about who's actually backing her decision and what it means for American athletes going forward changes everything. Stay with me.
Linked by watching dog groups and mass detention and forced labor camps. She chose to play for a country literally responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of his own people, and literally running a concentration camp while we are talking. And instead of the country where she was born and given the opportunity. So you don't just get to enjoy freedom of U.S. as citizenship while acting literally a global PR asset for the Chinese Communist Party. So she should definitely, pay for the consequences.
Let's start from zero, because some of you are hearing this name for the first time. Eileen Gu is a freestyle skier. She was born in San Francisco. She grew up in California. The United States of America raised her, trained her, and gave her every opportunity she ever had. Then she made a decision. She chose to compete for China at the Olympics instead of the country that built her. She won medals. She signed enormous endorsement deals with Chinese state-linked brands. She became a superstar in Beijing. Now she's claiming she's the victim, attacked, assaulted, threatened, because Americans had the nerve to be upset about it. NBA players, of all people, stepped up and called the whole thing out. Here's why this matters to working Americans. When someone uses the freedom this country gave them to glorify the regime most hostile to that freedom, and then demand sympathy for the blowback, the conversation about loyalty and the American flag becomes very personal, very fast. That is the full frame. Now, let's get into it. The strongest version of the case against Eileen Gu doesn't come from a politician or a pundit. It comes down to three specific facts: where she was born, who she chose to represent, and what she goes silent about when the cameras stay on. One voice in this debate put all three of those things together in a way that did not leave much room for interpretation. That final line is the one that sticks. When human rights come up, she disappears. She has a global platform. She has hundreds of millions of followers across American and Chinese social media. She has more reach than most senators. And the documented, verified, internationally reported story of mass detention and forced labor in China, the very government she chose to represent, gets complete radio silence from her. That is not an oversight. Athletes with real courage speak up even when it costs them money. She had every tool to say something. She chose not to. And that choice tells you everything about what the endorsement deals actually meant to her. Now, her defenders pushed back hard during the Beijing Games. They said the attacks on her were cruel. They pointed to something genuinely painful that was happening in her life at that exact moment. Something that had nothing to do with politics. Right before a press conference at the 2022 Olympics, Gu found out her grandmother had died. She walked in anyway, and what she said was real and raw.
The reason I was late is that I just found out that my grandma passed away, and she was a really big part of my life growing up, and someone I looked up to immensely. She was such a strong she was a fighter, and I think what's so interesting is that a lot of people just cruise through life, but she was a steamship. Like, this woman commanded life, and she grabbed it by the reins, and she made it into what she wanted it to be. And she inspired me so much. The last time I saw her before I came to the Olympics, she was very sick, so I knew that this was a possibility.
You hear that and you feel it. She was a steamship. This woman commanded life. That grief was not performed. She loved her grandmother deeply, and that loss hit her in the middle of one of the highest pressure moments of her life. Nobody should mock that. Nobody decent does. Acknowledging someone's pain costs nothing, and the people who turned that press conference into a political weapon against her were wrong to do it. But her supporters didn't stop there. They used that grief as a full shutdown of every legitimate question about her choices. And she went further. She tied her decision to represent China directly to her grandmother's memory, framing it as something sacred and untouchable. That second part is where the honest conversation has to continue.
I didn't promise her that I was going to win, but I did promise her that I was going to be brave, like she has been brave. And that's why I keep referring to this theme of like betting on myself and like being brave and taking risks. It actually goes back to that promise that I made my grandma. And so I'm really happy that I was able to uphold that and hopefully do her proud. But it's also a really difficult time for me now. So I really apologize for being late, but like that's what was going on. Sorry. Guo Zhenfeng. Yeah, that's my middle name. Feng for her. Yeah.
Go, Eileen, Sheshe, for
Thank
sharing
you.
your emotions with us. That's all what we have for today.
She promised to be brave. She said she bet on herself. Respected. But bravery is not selective. You cannot invoke courage as your brand identity and then go quiet the moment a reporter asks about Uyghur detention camps. Her grandmother's name, her heritage, her personal story, all of that is real and worthy of respect. The Chinese Communist Party's record is also real. Those two things do not cancel each other out. One is a family story. The other is a government that the United Nations has formally accused of crimes against humanity. She chose to wear that government's flag. That choice carries weight that no press conference can dissolve. The story then shifted into something more serious. Gu went public with claims about what she says happened to her physically, and the media ran with it as though it reframed the entire debate. If she was robbed, that is a crime, and it should be prosecuted. If she received credible death threats, law enforcement should take that seriously. Those things, if verified, are wrong, regardless of your politics. But here is what happened in real time. The moment those claims went public, the entire national conversation flipped. Suddenly, the story was no longer about her endorsement deals or her silence on human rights. It became about victimhood. Corporate media buried the lead and replaced it with a sympathy narrative. The question of what she chose and why got swapped out for the question of how badly the critics behaved. That is a very deliberate redirect, and it worked, at least for a while. Which brings us to the statement that reportedly set NBA players off, because she did not stop at claiming victim status. She went one step further and took a swing at her critics that crossed a line. They kind of lumped China into this monolithic entity, and they just hate China. That is the card she played. Not an honest response to the criticism, not an acknowledgement of why people were upset, a flat-out suggestion that the people questioning her are racist. The NBA players who pushed back on that understand something she apparently does not. There is a difference between the Chinese people and the Chinese Communist Party. Criticizing a government is not hating a population. Every serious person making the case against her choices has been clear about that distinction. She chose to blur it anyway, because blurring it is the only way to avoid answering the real question. An athlete who watched the entire NBA organization bend the knee to Beijing pressure for years, who saw what happened to Daryl Morey for one tweet supporting Hong Kong. Those players have zero patience for that framing. The flag is not just fabric. It represents a contract between a nation and the people it shelters, educates, and equips to compete on the world stage. Eileen Gu collected everything this country had to offer, then stepped onto an Olympic podium under a different banner, and now wants grace for the consequences. That debt doesn't